Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. I'm doing pretty well. On Saturday, I visited the New York Antiquarian Book Fair, which was, as it turns out, the last public event I attended before lockdowns began in 2020. It was great to go back to the Park Avenue Armory and look at all the amazing collections and great antiquarian books and not buy anything. I mean, literally, the first thing that caught my eye when I came in was a first edition of Orwell's essay collection, Inside the Whale, which was going for a cool $13,000, which, yes, I could technically afford, but no, I was not going to spend. I also saw the really neat collection that they had, one of the exhibitors had, of Amy Winehouse's books, like her library, which is being sold on block for, I think, about $135,000. There were some really great items in there. I mean, it caught my eye. I didn't realize it was her stuff at first. What caught my eye was a copy of V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and David Lloyd, and then a few Love and Rockets collections. And I realized, oh, this is the Amy Winehouse stuff. And as I was walking by the four display cases, the last thing I saw at the very end was a copy of Glenn David Gould's first novel, Carter Beats the Devil, and a whole note about the significance of the book to Amy and the bookmark that was in it. And so I took a picture of that and zapped it to Glenn. And it turns out he knew she liked the novel, and they had actually there were tentative plans for them to get together that never came to fruition. But anyway, it was pretty neat. And I also got to catch up briefly with past pod guest Henry Wessels, who works for James Cummins bookseller and had just sold this unique Charlotte Bronte teenage poetry handmade, I guess, chapbook. Is a single copy, single edition, this little tiny book that Charlotte Bronte made. Anyway, it was on display there, and that was really an amazing thing to see, along with some of the other neat stuff. But Henry reminded me, through our masks, that 2 years ago, we were there with no masks whatsoever, worried about handshakes. I'm still amazed that I managed not to get infected on that last day in New York City back in 2020. Few more days ahead of me now to make sure I did not get infected this past Saturday, but, we'll see. Because after the fair, I decided to roll the dice and walk up to the temporary location of the Frick Museum in the old Whitney site. And this is the first art museum trip that I've taken since I took up drawing and painting, and that was a really trippy experience. I have not worked with oil paints yet. I've only done pen, ink, watercolors, colored pencils, markers, etc. But and everything there was in oil pretty much. But I just found myself getting closer and closer to some of these canvases, just looking more deeply into textures and trying to understand brush strokes and what the artists were doing more than I ever did, just because I've got some scant experience now doing this. Of course, I was also very, very focused on how different painters rendered trees, as I'm sure you can imagine if you've seen the tree stuff that started me on this whole art making thing. I will say Constable blew my mind. There were things I saw looking at some of his trees that I just, so all of that said, I took out my sketch pad a couple of times and actually tried to capture a couple of figures, which, I know, pretentious artist, whatever. I had my hair down too, so I looked like this wild, scraggly maniac. But I drew the three guys in Goya's painting The Forge. which, well, it's a very kinetic thing. And I just wanted to capture the energy of the guy with the sledgehammer in the foreground. And I think I did an okay job of it. The big thing I did was Rembrandt's self-portrait, which is this wonderful golden and brown older Rembrandt sitting on a chair, maybe a throne. Anyway, it's something that's meant a lot to me over the years. And this time I just sat in front of it and drew. And it was just outlines and such. I've been putting some drapery and some shading into it, but not a ton. But just putting it on paper, same thing with the Goya, it helped me see the painting differently and see its composition differently than if I was just looking at it. I did the Rembrandt directly in ink, which was also exciting for me because, I live a life of adventure. And there were people sitting there sort of watching. I think they wanted to see what I did ultimately, but I wasn't that sort of artist. It came out okay. It's not great. The face is terrible, as all my faces are, but I made something. And after all that, my GPS managed to send me on this incredibly counterintuitive but really fast route out of Manhattan, which I think was a makeup for the time last week when it sent me into a DWI checkpoint on the George Washington Bridge at 11 o'clock at night, which I'm still pissed off about. Anyway, all of this is more than you need to know, but the point is I got out, I went into the city, I saw art, and I kind of made art. And, I tend to gush. What can I say? So let's get to this week's show. Now, my guest this time around is the wonderful artist, painter, portraitist, Celia Paul. Her new book, Letters to Gwen John, comes out this week in the U.S. after a UK release last fall. Now, Celia was on in late 2020 for her first book, Self-Portrait, memoir of sorts. And I was just dying to get her back on the show for this one. Both titles are from New York Review Books, by the way. So I'll get it out of the way. I loved Letters to Gwen John. It is one of the best things I've read this past year. It is a phenomenal book. I look forward to foisting it off on a lot of friends of mine after it comes out. Now, Gwen John was, she was an artist. She was one of Rodin's models and lovers, and an older sister of the artist Augustus John. And she died in 1938. And the book alternates between letters that Celia writes to her in 2019 and 2020 and chapters of sort of biographical essays, along with reproductions of Celia's and Gwen's art. And in the letters, Celia explores each of their lives as artists, as lovers of great artists, in Celia's case, Lucian Freud, and as women in a man's world, and a lot of the unique aspects of, or the singular aspects of Celia's life and the ways they parallel and diverge from Gwen's. And she sort of teases out her own memoiristic details to make a book that captures plenty about the process of making art, along with the sacrifices that entails. I mean, Celia is unsparing in her descriptions of motherhood, in her relationships with her own parents and her sisters, and with Freud, and of her husband's final years, and of the artistic seclusion she's lived in for decades, and how that's changed through both, the inevitable losses that life brings us and the recent periods of lockdown. I mean, you're reading these things and the letters are dated, so you can see what's headed towards 2020, and there's a cliff coming. It's not, written with that sort of tension in mind, but that's the sort of stuff that I read into it, where for everything this writer is conveying, that something is going to change. It's very, very significant. But anyway, beyond that, this is a flat-out beautiful book. There were passages that I dog-eared simply because Celia's descriptions were just breathtaking. Now, you have to understand, for me, that is a big thing. I don't like to dog ear. Usually, I only dog ear just to note something I want to ask the writer about if I don't have anything on hand to write down a page number and all that. So the fact that I marked up this book just because there were sections that took my breath away, I'm amazed that someone who is this great a painter is also this great a writer. So all I could say is reading Letters to Gwen John is a fantastic experience. And like I said, I can't wait to talk to friends of mine once they've read it. And I hope you listeners pick it up along with Self-Portrait. The two of them complement each other beautifully. Although as I asked Celia during this conversation, is it possible that this book is more of a self-portrait than Self-Portrait is? And you'll have to listen to find out. Anyway, I do want to note that I was really looking forward to this conversation, maybe to the point of some degree of anxiety, but you guys know I have that anyway, because my first talk with Celia was compelling, illuminating, haunting. There were a lot of threads from that talk, like our discussion of her relationship with Lucian Freud and the nature of desire and what it takes to make art, that I hoped we could weave together this time, now that we had a first conversation under our belt, now that we knew each other a little, all of which is assuming she remembered anything about our first conversation, because as you guys know, I assume anybody who talks to me forgets who I am the moment I hit the stop record button, but she turned out to hold on to some details of our past talk. And I think we managed to have a good conversation, and I'm hoping we get more opportunities to gab in the years ahead. Also, for my readers in London and that general area, the Victoria Miro Gallery is showing an exhibition of new paintings by Celia called Memory and Desire through May 7th. That's 2022 for you time travelers out there. I'll put info about that in the show notes, but the neat thing, if you go to the link for that, there is a 5-minute video about the exhibition, about Letters to Gwen John, and a lot of the video is Celia painting, and that's kind of amazing to watch for me. So anyway, here's Celia's bio from the book. Celia Paul is recognized as one of the most important painters working in Britain today. Her major solo exhibitions include Celia Paul, curated by Hilton Alls at the Yale Center for British Art and the Huntington Art Museum in San Marino, California; Desdemona for Cecilia by Hilton at Gallery Met, New York; and Gwen John and Celia Paul at Pallant House Gallery, Chichester, UK. Her work was included in the group exhibition Too Human at Tate Britain. Her first book, Self-Portrait, was published by New York Review Books in 2020. And now, the 2022 Virtual Memories conversation with Celia Paul. I just want to say I listened back to our 2020 conversation from about 18 months ago. And the funny thing is, in the intervening time, I took up drawing and painting. So all of those things I ask you about, like the act of looking and the destruction that drawing and painting entails, I understand all that now. I get it all, not
yes,
on a professional level by any means.
I do remember you asked some quite interesting questions. I remember you talked to me about watercolor and using large-scale watercolor and everything, and I sensed you had a kind of interest of your own in it.
I didn't know that until 3 months later when I picked up a pencil and started drawing trees in my backyard, and then it just took over. Yes. I learned how to see things and not think in the process, and then the leaves started coming in, and I had to figure out color and all this other craziness. But yeah, I look back on some of my conversations with artists, particularly the one you and I had, and realize, I think of what you're saying, that, yeah, Gil, you're kind of making up for lost time. This was in there. But.
Yes, no, I think there's nothing like it, is there? So
I had never experienced the stillness, which is something you get into in this book, which we'll talk about in a moment, but the stillness in the looking and drawing,
yes,
the sort of Zen transcendence thing that I will talk to you more about that and how you capture or fail to capture that in different moments. But my first real question is, where did Letters to Gwen John begin for you?
Well, after writing Self-Portrait, I didn't think I'd write another book. I didn't think I would write Self-Portrait, but both books.
I didn't think I would start drawing at 50 either, but go.
But yes, I mean, both things, like you, in a way, you kind of out of a sort of necessity and need. I hadn't realised that Self-Portrait sort of deliberately, in hindsight deliberately, kind of ends open-endedly. And it left me feeling that I needed to explore for myself what kind of painter I am, actually. And so that's what made me want to write to Gwen John, a painter that I feel and have always felt kind of intimately connected to, and think more about my own identity as an artist through her.
Yeah, where did you first learn about Gwen? And yeah, go on. Sorry.
It's such a difficult thing to say because she feels so intimate to me that I just, it's difficult to put a date on it. And I didn't have a kind of sudden moment when I felt she was the one for me. But I suppose because our lives have sort of had very strange parallels. We both kind of grew up by the sea in the West Country of in Britain, she in Pembrokeshire, me on the North Devon coast. And nature from the beginning meant a lot to both of us. And then from there, we both came to study at the Slade School of Art in London, where we both had the same kind of discipline of drawing from life and questioning our own kind of talent in that kind of really still very male world, even when I went there in the late 1970s. And then, of course, both she and I have to some extent been associated and possibly overshadowed by the men we've been involved with. Her brother, Augustus John, was a painter, and he also went to the Slade School of Art, where he was kind of termed a genius from very early on, whereas she never had that kind of accolade. And then she left London and went to Paris, where she became an artist's model and found work eventually with Auguste Rodin, who was the most famous sculptor of the day. And she modelled for him and started a passionate affair with him, and which lasted, well, for the rest of his lifetime and for many, many years. And something very similar for me, that Lucian Freud was a visiting tutor at the Slade School of Art, and I was 18 and he was 55, whereas Gwen was 27 and Rodin 63, so similar kind of age gap. But again, I had to struggle with my own feelings of being in love with Lucian and still preserving my own artistic identity. And so I think she shared a very similar struggle to me.
And how'd your understanding of her change over the course of the book? Or was it more about your understanding of yourself in relation to her and art?
I think as the book develops, there's a greater sense of Gwen herself. She comes more and more into focus. I think at the beginning I have to kind of lay out her biographical details. This is not, I'd like to kind of stress this, that it's not a biography of Gwen John by any means. No. I'm not an art historian or a Gwen John expert. But I had to kind of lay out the facts of her life in a minimal way, just to introduce her to the world, because she is very neglected as an artist and still very unrecognised. And a lot of people really haven't heard of her and they don't know her work. But I suppose over the course of the book, it became clearer to me just how impressive her self-discipline was. And that's something that really I wanted to learn from, that even at the most turbulent times of her life, when she was most passionately involved with Rodin, she was producing these artworks of the most miraculous focus and delicacy on a small scale mainly, and channeling all her feelings into her painting. And I wanted to learn similarly from her discipline, because the last years have been very, very turbulent for me as well, that not only the pandemic, but my husband was dying and actually died last March. And I wrote the book throughout his illness. And so to have Gwen's kind of discipline and focus as an example to me to channel my own feelings of grief, and it became very important to me. And also her choosing solitude was an important thing for me to think about, because of knowing that I would soon know solitude myself in a new way.
And yet, I mean, I'm only going by your depictions of your life from Self-Portrait and this book. What you portray is a life that's very secluded to begin with. I know there was your husband, there's your relationship with your son, but it's something I struggle with, the sense of, well, in this case, pandemic lockdown, your artistic isolation, and then the idea of loneliness and that question of becoming a recluse, like Gwen. How much are you contemplating that as you're approaching the age at which Gwen John died, I guess at 62, 63?
63, yes. Yeah. Well,
Tell me about loneliness, I guess.
I think we've all, over these last years, have had to deal with loneliness in a new way, haven't we? Everyone, even if it means being holed up with somebody for all this time. I mean, everyone has got a new feeling about whether to be alone or whether to be with somebody. And it does seem like it's all or nothing in a way that it wasn't clear that it was before. And so I think the choices that we're all making now are just that much more stark. And I think for me, I've had to make those sort of choices throughout my life, partly to do with my own dilemma, which I think is, quite a common, maybe even universal dilemma of whether to be loved and to go for love, or to go for one's ambition, to follow one's desire for oneself. And for my own sake, I find it particularly difficult because I know when I'm with somebody I love, I want to be there for them in a way that's kind of quite, I suppose, quite selfless. I was like that when I was with Lucian to some degree, and I was certainly like that with my son. And so it meant that I had to be extra ruthless to carve a space for myself. I do envy people who are perhaps more relaxed about things, or maybe have a more healthy way of being selfish. But I haven't found it for myself yet. And that's something I've always struggled with. And I think Gwen herself struggled in exactly the same way. She had a very intense relationship with her brother, and she lived with him when they were both students at the Slade. And at that time, because she's so kind of thin-skinned and receptive to everything that goes on around her, as I say in the book, it's like almost like a process of osmosis. She takes in and gives out, so that she loses a part of herself as she takes in, the company of the presence of the person she loves. And while she was living with Augustus, she painted a very derivative painting, which could have been by him. It's a kind of, it's a sort of, I can't remember what it's called, a group of artists. And it depicts her friends from the Slade, including Augustus. And it's very anecdotal. And it really, if you didn't see that if it wasn't credited by her, you'd think it was by Augustus. Mm-hmm. And so I think in order to stop this kind of process of losing identity happening, she had, similarly to me, had to kind of be extremely ruthless about guarding her own space. And that's part of the reason why she went to Paris, and part of the reason why her interiors, her rooms, are just kind of like unviolated spaces, her own space where you don't feel the presence of anybody else.
Yeah, it is this ongoing tension, and it ties into what we talked about last time, particularly with women as artists. Mm. I did a show about with Nicole Rudick, who did a book about Niki de Saint-Phal, and that balance of art, children, and ruthlessness that's necessary to create something like the Tarot Garden and everything else she was building.
Yes.
And yeah, it's that question. I don't know how to put it to you, but we've talked once before, so I can just ask this bluntly. What does it mean to be a good mother?
Oh, it's, are you asking the right person?
Maybe as a negative, I suppose, same way I'd ask my father, and just do the opposite of anything he suggested. I'm kidding.
I don't think there's any kind of rule about that, because it's such a personal thing between you and your child, because everyone is different. And I think there needs to be a degree of honesty. And actually, my son understands exactly what I was trying to do and what I am doing. And he's tremendously proud of me. and we're very close. We speak every day, and the book is dedicated to him. He wouldn't mind what I wrote about him, and I hope it means that he can write absolutely anything about me. And I think we love each other in a deep way that goes beyond convention. And I think that's to do with having always been open about my own vulnerability in regards him and in regards my own art. And he himself is a wonderful writer, and I'm hoping one day he will be able to write about me if he wants to, and be able to say what might seem hurtful, but I won't be hurt. And I think that's where I feel maybe I've been okay as a mother, from just allowing him to have his own voice, even if it's to express hurt or anger.
Oh, we'll see if I get him on the podcast later. Maybe he'll say mean-spirited stuff. I'm just kidding. He'll be a good guest too, I'm sure. But let me ask something that takes place in the book. A question that I had, according to my notes, it's on page 70. Not that either of us need to refer to it. You write that Lucian would have loved Gwen.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could expand on it, because what I read it as is he would have loved eating another artist and making that artist sacrifice her art for his. And I'm probably being really unfair and misreading and unsubtle. So can you unpack the Lucian would have loved Gwen and what you mean?
Well, Lucian was attracted to young women artists. There's no doubt about it. But he was also threatened by female ambition. Yeah. And so this is something I had to battle with. And I think Gwen's way of battling with it was not to battle at all, was to just give herself utterly to love. When she was passionately involved with Rodin, she didn't paint. When she was most passionately involved with him, she didn't. He actually encouraged her to paint, so that she did return to her work, even when she was in love with him. But there was a time when she didn't, and Lucian was very impressed by this and actually moved by it. He felt that there was something very beautiful about the way she just was so submissive.
So I'm not misreading that exactly. He would have loved that sense of a strong female artist giving up herself.
Yes.
Is that okay? Because that's where I sort of saw it and thought, maybe I'm putting too much of my own context into this general weirdness, but yeah, it's a book that's filled with, to me, such revelation about your own life, or at least revealingness. I'll put it that way, and then the depths with which you're able to both show the convergence and parallels, as well as the divergence you have with her. I think it's just an amazing piece of work, which actually raises my question: how much are you discovering of yourself in writing that painting didn't necessarily open you up to?
Well, I still think of myself as a painter. I don't think of myself as a writer. I think I've written things when I feel I actually have to say something. And whereas painting is more of a kind of discipline, It's something I need to do every day for my own peace of mind and for my sanity. As you're beginning to explore in your own artwork, there is something tremendously healing about using the materiality of paint and pencils and watercolour, something with your hands in a quite different way to writing. But for writing becomes necessary, I think, because painting is such a kind of oblique art that if you want to get a message across in an unchallenged, well, you can challenge writing, but if you want to get a message across directly, I think you're more successful to do it with language, because we all use words all the time, and we understand words in a different way to painting, which is more mysterious. And so I think I wanted to make it clear to myself and as a communication what it feels like to be a painter like myself.
Yeah, that I don't know if I would have gotten the same thing out of this book a year and a half ago. You just, and again, all I've done is scrawl, nothing. I'll send you pictures, you'll see, and
I'd
laugh, but whatever.
See, yeah.
But yeah, there's a degree of what you write about the act of making art that I just found utterly illuminating within the overall frame of this book. Let me ask the decision to go with the epistolary form, because you mentioned, I forget where, that letters are like paintings, that it's almost a bridge between writing and visual art that you make. Can you? Well, the other thing I also should point out, I mail a postcard out every day. I started this year I'm going to send someone a postcard because we all get emails. We get our texts and voicemails and all this stuff. And I thought, how great is it when you get the mail that day and somebody thought of you and wrote something and stamped it and sent it out. So yeah, I discovered for a $20 box of postcards from the Met Museum of Art, the amount of joy that I've spread in the world by doing this. And I'll get your mailing address someday and hit you with one of these.
I'd love that. Yes.
But that choice for semi-epistolary form, like you said, you have those interstitial chapters that are biographical, but going with letters, why is it letters to Gwen John?
Well, I have in the past described painting as being like a handwritten letter, because handwriting conveys the character of the person who's writing, and as well as it being a message, which I think a great painting is. But I think obviously doing things on the computer, it's not handwritten. But I think a letter and a painting do share that they're both done in the constant present. That if you read a letter, it is what's happening now and what's happening in the space that you're in when you're writing. And it's the same thing with a painting. And I think in self-portrait, I felt that some of the most powerful bits for me were the diary entries that I'd written when I was a young woman, when, my feelings about Lucian kind of overspilled on the page, and I felt I had to write about my feelings. And so I felt that a way to carry on with that, to make it immediate in the way that a diary entry is, and a letter is, and a painting is, is to write a letter to Gwen. And it also didn't feel too artificial to me to write to Gwen, even though she's dead, because with an artist, you always say, like you say, Gwen John is a great painter. It's not Gwen John was. And so it doesn't feel like I'm kind of writing to Marie Antoinette or somebody from history. It's actually like she is a living presence in the way that I think great artists are and remain living presence.
You've got a line in there from her sister Winifred that Gwen would wish to be forgotten. What do you think of that? Do you agree with it? Do you feel that, you need to remember her regardless?
Well, I completely agree with what Winifred is saying, and I think Gwen would in one way wish to be forgotten. But there again, she says, and somewhere else, that she knows her work will have some value. And so she is ambitious for her work. I think if this doesn't sound terribly boastful, I think, that Charlotte Bronte raided Emily Bronte's kind of chest of drawers where she kept her poems, and which Charlotte kind of found the key to the locked drawer and opened the drawer and found these miraculous poems by Emily Bronte. And if it weren't for Charlotte, we wouldn't know about Emily Bronte's writings at all. And yet I think Emily secretly would have wanted to be known and recognised as well. Her poems are full of ambition and full of ideas of posterity, so that in some way, even though she felt violated and was very angry with Charlotte at the time, I think on another level she was very grateful to her. So if Gwen might have similar feelings about me, but I think she's also quite grateful to me as well, because I think, not only by my writing, but other people who are writing about her, bringing her into the open, are giving her the recognition that really is due to her. I think what Winifred was also referring to was that Augustus had wanted to write a biography of Gwen John after she died, and made kind of copious notes about what he was going to say. And I think Winifred always knew that Gwen had very ambivalent feelings about Augustus's intrusion and his desire to possess her. And she would have hated that kind of appropriation that he had in mind.
Better to be forgotten than to be remembered in this particular
That's right.
way.
Yeah, that he had in mind, yes.
Is this book more of a self-portrait than self-portrait was?
I think I did feel that I needed to go deeper into myself. Maybe it does get closer to a certain truth. I think there's a freshness to self-portrait, and but I think I do get to know myself better and in a more deep way through my conversation with Gwen John. And I certainly wouldn't want to have any kind of appropriation of her or her life or her work in the way that I feel that Augustus had. I do want her to be free, and the whole point really of the book is to do with freedom.
Which is a weird seg, but America is supposed to equal liberty. So the book begins with you in Santa Monica, and you go into trips to LA, New York, and Yale. And it was your first real visits to America, only took place in recent years. Mm-hmm. What did America mean to you prior to that? And what did America mean to you?
Well, I've loved a lot of American literature, particularly. I love so much of American literature. I love Willa Cather, and I love Robert Lowell, and yes, I mean, I felt a sort of connection to America without,
wrecking it by ever coming here.
Yes. You see, I'm terribly frightened of traveling. I'm very, very, I get so overwhelmingly homesick. But then one of my closest friends, probably my closest friend actually, Angus Cook, who is the man in the double portrait that Lucian did of me, painting a naked man. Do you know it? I think it's...
Yeah. I think it's in Self-Portrait.
That's right. Yes, I think it's called Painter and Model. Angus is married to Jonathan Kaplan, an architect based in New York. And so Jonathan studied in New York with Hilton Owls, and it was, and then I met Hilton when he came over to curate a show for me at Victoria Miro in London, and I felt a deep connection to him, and he. It was through him that all these trips to America took place, because he curated the 3 exhibitions in New York, and then Yale, and then in Huntington in Los Angeles. And so it felt a sort of personal connection through him because of his vision for me and my art. And so... But I was quite overwhelmed by California, actually. The quality of the light was, and I think maybe it related a bit to my own childhood in India. Somehow it felt like a strange coming home when I was there.
Yeah. In terms of the quality of light again, or were there other aspects?
It was particularly to do with the light, and the ocean, because where I was in India, we were very close to the Indian Ocean. And then here I was again in Santa Monica, just right by the ocean there. So it felt like in some ways a sort of closing of a circle in a good, quite inspiring way.
Just from my scant experience out there, being in Santa Monica and then hearing reading your rendition of it was as jarring as the Nikki de Sanfal thing, realizing that her big collection is in La Jolla near San Diego, because that's really not the milieu in which I imagine her and her work. And it's like, oh yeah, life takes you in some weird places and directions, and you find something. So
yes, yeah. And I think the kind of the being open to new experiences was important to me as well.
Any plans to get out here in future? And I haven't been on a plane since February of 2020 at this point, so I'm not one to say, hey, you should come over. And,
I do want to come over. I would like to have another try at New York. I was so sort of timid when I was there that as I write in my book, I hardly dared go out of my room and more or less lived off room service. I found it so overwhelming and very different to what I'd expected. And I'd like to try again because I'm sure it's extraordinary. And I'd like to go to Yale again. And I do want to go to Maine because I love Edward Hopper's paintings and there seemed like such a special quality of light there. So I'd like to see that quality of light myself.
Yeah, I guess, is it just a basic, do you regret not getting to America sooner? Or, was it the right time in terms of, where you were in your life?
Well, it feels like the right time to me, really. I'm sort of, when Lucian died, I was 51, and things have been opening up for me sort of ever since. And part of that opening up is to do with being open to new experiences that I wouldn't have dreamt of before. He cast a shadow over my life in ways I'm only just beginning to explore, really, and to come to terms with. I loved him, and I do still love him, but he cast a mighty shadow.
Yeah, I did a show with, an art critic now at the Washington Post, Sebastian Smee, who did a book called The Art of Rivalry, where he took 4 pairs of artists who had, we'll say, rivalrous relationships. Mm-hmm. And he starts off with Lucian and Francis Bacon.
Yes.
And there are, let's see, I'll put it this way. Between self-portrait and then reading The Art of Rivalry, I got boy, that must have been a really complicated life and relationship to be involved in, and to see yourself outside of that, and to see yourself as a person outside of this. It raises a question. I mean, in the book, you mention, Lucian's obsession with balances of power in his art. And that you see that in your own work, but in a more subtle sense.
Yes.
Or that you're looking at those balances more subtly. Can you expand on that? And it also ties into what you wrote about not drawing men too often because we want to be in control of the sitting situation.
Yes, that's right. Even my husband, who is a very gentle person and actually loved me painting him and really was very dedicated to sitting, he still had all these kind of ploys to so that he wasn't just there for me. He was kind of using it for his own sake as well, which is something that I think women are particularly gifted at, giving themselves up to situations. And I think male painters, and maybe I have as well, have used this in their depictions of women. But I think I think I was kind of distracted from my path a bit by being influenced by Lucian in my early years with him, by exploring balances of power in a similar way that he does in a lot of his paintings. Wherever there are 2 figures in his paintings, it's always about who's on top. And in the one of me and Angus, I think he's kind of saying that I'm the one that has the power, and Angus maybe not so much. Lucian worked amazingly from Angus, did some of his most erotic and tender paintings from Angus, because Angus too has this gift of being able to give himself up to people and to experiences. It's quite a unique gift he has. But I in my own painting, I did a painting of a young man standing, and at the bottom of the canvas is his girlfriend lying down at his feet, and you can only just see her head. And in fact, that was how the balance of power seemed to be in that relationship. And in fact, they split up during the course of my doing the painting. And Lucian saw this painting and did a similar composition himself, actually using Angus and his then partner, Kerith Wyn Evans, where Angus is standing and Kerith is just at the bottom of the canvas. You can only see his head. But then I kind of realised that this painting that I'd done, which Lucian had done his own version of, really wasn't my own painting at all. And where it comes to balances of power in a relationship, when I've done groups of figures, like with my sisters, for example, it's not so much to do with balances of power, but to do with kind of subtleties of communication and to do with how they interact with each other, which is quite a difficult thing to define, actually. But people look different in portraits of single figures than they do in group portraits, because there's always some kind of dynamic going on in a group portrait, which has something to do with power, but not totally to do with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've yet to draw. I've yet to draw models or
yes.
People in real life. I mean, I've drawn from the screen, but we can talk about that also. I'm much happier standing outside drawing a branch of a forsythia than I am looking at a image on a computer screen and trying to draw that. But yeah, trying to understand. Again, like I say, you convey a great deal more about this over the course of the two books, and inspire a weird, and I'm sure it's masculine in its own way, challenge/jealousy of, well, I would know how to sit exactly perfectly fine. But, the realization that it's all our need for, well, you say power, some sort of dominance, even in submitting and, trying to sit quietly or trying to sit in.
Yes. I mean, I wasn't a very good sitter at all myself, for the very reasons you've just brought up. Yeah, but,
yeah. I'll have to see at some point. I'll get around to going to at least a live drawing class at some point and sitting down and doing that. But yeah, it's actually, I've got a trade show in New York City next month, and one of my artist pals like, while you're here, come down with me to Minerva's place in Chinatown. You'll sit and draw and all sorts of models. It'll be great. I'm like, sure. Apparently this is a thing I can do. So
how exciting.
Yeah, it's just weird, discovering that at a later age. But like you said, you open yourself to new experiences at almost the exact same age I started this. So my question for you, though, you mentioned in the book at 60, there's a sense of narrowing down your vision and intensifying it. And I mean, do you recognize that in the process that this is what you're doing, or is it a conscious thing that, I think of Philip Roth in his very later novels, basically they're long novellas. He took the shagginess of some of his larger work and really, compressed and amplified. And I don't know from a painterly perspective, what that entails, how conscious one is of that, or how much you start to detect that as a trend in your own work?
Well, I think there's a lot to do with the familiarity of the material that you use, that as you get older, it becomes more and more your own language, which gives you more and more freedom as you get older.
Let me ask, by materiality, do you mean the subjects that you're painting, or the actual physical tools?
The way to...
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, the way you use paint becomes something that's sort of uniquely yours more and more, which gives you more and more freedom, and possibly more and more freedom to be more concise as well, to say what's essential, because you're more sure of the language, and less need to actually show off and prove yourself, because with time running out and your future is running out as well. So what you need to say needs to be said now, and said honestly, in a way that sort of precludes any kind of self-consciousness that came with earlier work.
Yeah. I mean, I think of the way you were writing about your husband, and the realization or understanding that this was the last time. This is the last time he'll be sitting for you. You'll still do other paintings of him, as you mentioned, but that sense of knowing what's leaving, knowing the mortality, I suppose.
Yes.
The other thing that I haven't brought up, that I've talked about on the show, 6 months after taking up painting, I got diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Not life-threatening. I know. Mm-hmm. I didn't mean to dump this on you, but again, a non-aggressive, dormant, could take many, many years. There's lots of good treatment, so don't worry that I'm mortally ill or anything. That said, the maybe 10, 12 days in between, my doctor thinking something's up and that first oncologist appointment, you start reconsidering life and, what you really want to get across, and what matters and doesn't matter in very short order. Then I got the bad news and was told it could be decades, and don't freak out about it. But,
yes.
So it's been an eventful 18 months, Celia. That's what I'm saying. Art, mortality, all this stuff has come down on me in the same ways it's come down on you, except in reverse order.
Yes. No, I'm very sorry. Does it mean you have to...
Literally nothing. No, what's great is, and I'll fill you in, they said literally nothing you did caused this, nothing you do can affect its progression,
right.
And there's no cure, but there's all sorts of great treatments.
Yes.
And I thought, I'm a micromanaging control freak, and you've just told me every aspect of my life didn't mean anything about something super mortal. So, okay, thanks, welcome to 50. But yeah, that sense of, and again, I discovered this after having taken up drawing and had that moment of, what do I really want to do? And what do I want to do with this podcast? What do I want to, actually write before I'm gone?
Yes, that's right.
And I don't know, I mean, you've seen that at a distance with your husband. Did it, and your mother and your father's passing also, and and Lucian's death too.
Yes, yeah.
You talk about how difficult loss has been for you. Do you look inside like that? I mean, is it a sense of your own mortality that hits you with these losses?
The thing is, I'm not at all afraid of my own death. I'm not afraid of death at all. Yeah. Not at all. I'm sort of, what it's made me realize is just I need to make sure what really matters. And I feel that, we've been talking about how important it is to sort of open up to new experiences and everything. But there's also the whole question of love as well is terribly fraught, because if you open yourself up to love, every time I've kind of opened myself up to love, it also involves hurt. And I think you have to be prepared for that as well, to be able to know you're going to get hurt again. I mean, not only through love, but through every experience. You have to, if you're going to live your life as fully as you can for whatever time left you have also got to be open to being hurt again. And everything, I'm finding everything sort of painful with beauty. I don't know if you are as well, just this kind of, because of the feeling of mortality, just everything seems sometimes too painfully beautiful. And also, you know, people you love seem so painfully beautiful, and just everything, but you have to go on being open to that pain as well. So I suppose I'm hoping that I'll, in my last years, be tremendously tough. That's what I'm hoping for most of all, being both tough, but also not closed down, not closed in on myself. I want to go on being open, but able to deal with whatever life chooses to throw at me.
Like weird conversations with guys in New Jersey who dump all of this personal stuff on you in the middle of a podcast. But yeah, that's a separate thing. You surely couldn't have expected that to happen from our past conversation. But let me ask, do you still feel that My Mother and God is your best painting?
I'm not sure. I think I have been working very well recently. I think the because I've experienced loneliness in a way I haven't done before, especially since my husband died. And it's been quite inspiring, I have to admit. And I've got an exhibition on at the moment at the Victoria Miro Gallery, and the title of the exhibition is Memory and Desire, after the Eliot quote about April being the cruelest month, mixing memory and desire. And because the exhibition is on in April, and I think it may be my best exhibition, because of all that I've put into it through this recent experience of being very, very solitary.
It kills me that all I can see of your work is printed in the book or on screen, that like I just haven't been there in person or seen your work in person. I think there's someone in New York. When I interviewed Ed Sorel, he mentioned the Gwen John collector or gallerist, who I'm blanking on the name of.
Oh, John Quinn, yes.
Oh, no, I mean contemporary now. There's someone who deals in Gwen John work, a woman. And you mentioned her in the acknowledgments. Got to see. Yeah. I'm blanking on the name. But anyway, yeah, that sense of getting to see your work in person someday is one of those things that, we all talk about things we want to do after the pandemic. And that's in the area of, yeah, I've really come to learn over the last couple of years that seeing a piece of art on screen is just an image.
Yes,
it's
yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a sense of wanting to see your work, or, again, if you get a New York exhibition going again, I'll make the trip into the city. We'll see about that.
Thank you. I'd love to know what you think. Yes.
But it raises the question, which we got at the end of our conversation last time, and which you hint at solving at the end of this book. Did you get to see Gwen's grave in Dieppe?
No, all the pandemic restrictions prevented that. I couldn't.
I wasn't sure because you had that painting that's titled Dieppe, and I I was sitting there like, oh, did she go and she's not telling us? Or
it's to do, I think that painting represents Gwen's longing for Dieppe and my longing to go to Dieppe. But, and that's partly why I painted it that sort of beautiful blue, because I think don't you think that blue can convey longing in a way that hardly any other colour can? So I made it a particularly blue sea for Gwen, who had such blue eyes as well. So.
It reminds me of William Gass, that On Being Blue essay. I don't know if you've seen it or not. I'll forward it to you after this. An essay on the color blue. It's one of the most gorgeous pieces of writing in English that's out there. It's something. But on the strength of that, and the unfortunate question that I always have to ask writers, do you still have the writing bug? Are you working on more prose?
I'm not working on more prose, and I've got no ideas for it at the moment. But that's not to say it won't happen again. But I'm quite glad for the moment just to get on with the painting.
I'm awfully happy we got to sit down and have this conversation, but going back over our previous one, I realize how many threads of that you were working through.
Yes.
When we talked before, it's like so many things. I'm like, oh, wait, this is reflected in the book. I see now that she was kind of working through a lot of these thoughts. So, I'm awfully glad to get the opportunity to sit down and talk again.
I'm very glad to talk to you as well. I love our conversations. Yes.
I will send you a postcard at some point, and I'll send you bad images of my very amateurish art. But
thank you, and good luck with everything. Yes.
Celia, thanks so much for coming back on the show, and I hope next time we get to do this in person.
Yes, so do I. Thank you, Gil. Thank you.
And that was Celia Paul. Her new book is Letters to Gwen John, which is just out in the U.S. from New York Review Books. Go pick up that one and her first book, Self-Portrait, also from NYRB. Trust me, they're fantastic. The art reproductions are great, even though they're just book size and they're just reproductions, and I really, really, really want to see her work in person someday. But anyway, go pick up these books. They are, if you're an artist, if you're interested in the arts, if you're interested in the balance of art and the day-to-day life, these books are indispensable, frankly. Now, Celia has no website, no social media presence, thank gosh, but you can find her work through the Victoria Miro Gallery, and I'll put a link to that in the show and episode notes for this one. So I do want to say it is not conscious planning on my part, and anyone who knows me understands I put this show together by the seat of my pants, but I feel lots of resonances between these talks with Celia and some recent ones that I've had with Annalie Furmark, Sebastian Smee, who was friends with Lucian Freud, Nicole Rudick and her Nikki de Sanfal book, and the one I kicked off this year with Wallace Wilde Minozzi. On top of that, next week's show is going to be with Julia Phillips, the author of a new book about women artists and writers and the quote-unquote mind-baby problem. So I don't know, maybe I'm onto something here. Maybe I'm just going in a different direction than I used to, but, exploring visual art, exploring feminine issues, which sounds terrible, exploring the roles and the ways women have worked in men's worlds, I guess. I don't know. It feels like the show is going in some interesting directions. So you can support this podcast by telling other people about it. Let them know that there's this neat podcast that comes out every week with fascinating conversations with interesting artistic people. You can also help by telling me what you like and don't like about the show, who you'd like to hear me record with, what movie or TV show or book or music or art exhibition, comic, piece of theater, whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me an email, DM, postcard, letter, or leaving me a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. And that goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in a weird conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you are going to go really long, just call back and leave a second message. Also, let me know if it would be cool to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. I would never do that without someone's permission, but you might have something you want to have the whole audience hear. Anyway, if you have money to spare, don't give it to me. I do just fine on my own. I've got that patreon.com/VMSpod. But what I'd really like you to do is give to people or institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Topato Go, and other crowdfunding platforms. If you're looking for somewhere to start with institutions or foundations, I give to my local food bank. I give to the Poor People's Campaign. There are other things you can do: freedom funds, election funds, refugee funds. There are a lot of ways you can contribute to try to help build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.